The dust swirled around Beatrice Harper's worn boots as she stumbled through the doorway of Morrison's General Store in Tulsa, Oklahoma, her vision swimming with black spots that threatened to pull her under. The summer heat of 1882 had been merciless for 3 days straight, but it was the hollow ache in her belly that finally brought her to her knees right there on the wooden floorboards between the pickle barrel and the counter displaying jars of hard candy she could never afford. She had not eaten in 4 days. The world tilted sideways, and Beatrice felt her body crumple like a discarded newspaper, her cheek pressing against the rough planks that smelled of tobacco and dust. Somewhere far away she heard voices shouting, but they sounded like they were coming from the bottom of a well. Her fingers twitched once, reaching for nothing, and then everything went black. When consciousness returned, it came slowly, like wading through thick molasses. Beatrice became aware of strong arms cradling her, lifting her as though she weighed nothing at all. Her eyelids fluttered open to reveal a face that seemed carved from sun-bronzed stone, all sharp angles and intense gray eyes that studied her with concern so raw it nearly took her breath away again. "Easy now," a deep voice rumbled above her, and she felt herself being carried outside into the shade of the store's awning. "Someone get Doc Henley, and bring water." Beatrice tried to speak, to tell this stranger she was fine, but her tongue felt thick and useless in her mouth. The man settled her gently onto a bench, kneeling before her so those storm cloud eyes were level with hers. "When did you last eat?" he asked, and there was no judgment in his tone, only a fierce protectiveness that made something crack open in her chest. She could not answer. Shame burned hotter than the Oklahoma sun beating down on the dusty street beyond their shaded refuge. Her dress, once a respectable blue calico, hung loose on her frame, the fabric faded and patched in 3 places. She had pawned her mother's wedding ring 2 weeks ago just to pay another month's rent on the tiny room above the seamstress shop where she took in mending when she could find it. 4 days, she finally whispered, the words scraping past her dry throat. The cowboy's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his tanned skin. He turned his head sharply toward the store entrance. "Morrison, get out here," the portly shopkeeper appeared, wringing his hands, his round face flushed. "Now see here, Vaughn, I cannot have people just collapsing in my store. It is bad for business." "Business?" The cowboy named Vaughn stood in one fluid motion, and though he was not an exceptionally tall man, perhaps just over 6 feet, he seemed to fill the entire boardwalk with his presence. "This woman just fainted from hunger on your floor and you are worried about business." "Well, I mean to say." Morrison sputtered. "Pack up a basket," Vaughn said, his voice dropping to a tone that brooked no argument. "Bread, cheese, dried beef, beans, coffee, flour, eggs. Everything she needs for a week. 2 weeks." "I cannot pay," Beatrice managed to say, forcing herself to sit up straighter despite the way the world still tilted dangerously. "I will not accept charity." Vaughn turned back to her, and something in his expression softened. He crouched down again, bringing himself back to her level. "It is not charity, it is human decency. And besides," he added, a hint of a smile touching his lips for the first time, "I am going to hire you." "Hire me?" Beatrice blinked, certain she must still be unconscious and dreaming this entire encounter. "I need someone to help at my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, has been trying to manage the cooking and cleaning on her own since her daughter got married and moved to Texas last spring. You would be doing me a favor." Beatrice studied him, searching for any sign of pity or deception in those steady gray eyes. She found neither. What she saw instead was something fierce and determined, as though he had made up his mind about something and nothing in heaven or earth would sway him from his course. "I do not even know your name," she said. Vaughn Riley. He offered his hand, calloused and strong, and when she placed her own trembling fingers in his, she felt a jolt of something electric race up her arm. "And you are Beatrice Harper." "Well, Miss Harper, it is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, even under these circumstances." "Now, will you let me help you?" Before she could answer, a woman bustled up with a canteen of water. Vaughn took it with a nod of thanks and held it to Beatrice's lips. She drank greedily, the cool liquid sliding down her parched throat like salvation itself. He pulled it away gently after a few swallows. "Not too much at once," he cautioned. "Your stomach needs to adjust." Morrison reappeared with a basket overflowing with provisions. Vaughn stood and pulled a leather wallet from his vest, counting out bills that made the shopkeeper's eyes widen with greed. When the transaction was complete, Vaughn picked up the basket with one hand and offered Beatrice his other arm. "Can you walk? My horse is just down the street." She nodded, not trusting her voice. With his support, she managed to rise on shaky legs. They moved slowly down the boardwalk, her hand tucked into the crook of his elbow, his patient stride matching her halting steps. Curious eyes watched from windows and doorways, and Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the temperature. Vaughn's horse was a magnificent bay gelding with intelligent eyes, and a coat that gleamed like polished mahogany. He secured the basket to the saddle, then turned to Beatrice with a question in his expression. "I should walk," she said. "I could not impose further by riding your horse. Miss Harper, you can barely stand. There is no imposition. The Riley Ranch is 5 miles outside of town. You will ride and I will walk alongside. But please." That one word, spoken so quietly and with such sincerity, stopped her protests cold. She allowed him to help her onto the saddle, his hand steadying at her waist. Once she was settled, he took up the reins and began walking, leading the horse down the main street of Tulsa and out toward the open country beyond. The landscape spread before them in rolling waves of prairie grass, dotted here and there with stands of blackjack oak and cottonwood trees. The Arkansas River glinted in the distance like a ribbon of silver under the afternoon sun. Despite her weakened state, Beatrice could not help but appreciate the stark beauty of the land. She had been in Oklahoma for 6 months, ever since her father's death left her penniless and alone in Missouri. She had thought she might find work in the growing territory, maybe even build a new life. Instead, she had found only closed doors and empty pockets. "How did you end up in Tulsa?" Vaughn asked, as though reading her thoughts. "My father passed away last winter. He had been a clerk in Kansas City, but when he died, I discovered he had debts I knew nothing about. The creditors took everything, even my mother's china that I had hoped to keep. A friend told me that Oklahoma Territory had opportunities for those willing to work hard." She paused, swallowing against the lump in her throat. "I thought I could make a fresh start. And instead, you nearly starved in a general store." There was anger in his voice, but she understood instinctively that it was not directed at her. "I had worked for a while, mending clothes for Mrs. Peterson. But then her sister came to visit from St. Louis and decided to stay, and her sister is a much better seamstress than I am. Mrs. Peterson let me go 3 weeks ago. I have been looking for work ever since, but no one seems to need a woman with limited skills and no references." "You have skills," Vaughn said firmly. "You can read and write, I assume." "Yes. My mother was a school teacher before she married. She educated me well." "Then you have more education than most people out here, and I am certain you have other abilities you are underestimating. Women often do." Beatrice found herself smiling despite everything. "You seem very certain of things, Mr. Riley." "Vaughn," he corrected. "And yes, I suppose I am. Life on a ranch teaches you to make quick decisions and stick by them. Second-guessing yourself is a good way to lose cattle or get hurt. They walked in companionable silence for a while. Beatrice focused on staying upright in the saddle, though the swaying motion of the horse's gait was surprisingly soothing. She found her eyes drawn again and again to the man walking beside her. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in his own skin, his boots stirring up small clouds of dust with each step. He wore the typical attire of a working cattleman: denim trousers, a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows revealing tanned forearms, a leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face from the relentless sun. "Have you always been a rancher?" she asked. "No. I grew up in Kansas on a farm near Wichita. My father raised wheat and corn, and I hated every minute of it." He glanced up at her with a self-deprecating smile. "That probably sounds ungrateful. It sounds honest. I wanted space, freedom. When I turned 21, I took my inheritance and came south to Oklahoma. Bought land when it was still dirt cheap and built the ranch from nothing. That was 5 years ago." "You started a ranch at 21. Beatrice could not keep the surprise from her voice. "I was young and probably foolish, but I had help. Mrs. Chen and her late husband were some of the first Chinese immigrants to settle in this area. They had a small plot next to my land, but farming was hard for them. After her husband died, I offered her a position as my housekeeper. She has been with me ever since. Her daughter, Lily, helped too until she married and moved away. You speak of them with great affection. They are family." He said it simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world to consider his housekeeper family. As they crested a low hill, Beatrice saw the ranch spread out before them in a shallow valley. It was not ostentatious, but it was clearly prosperous and well-maintained. The main house was a sturdy structure built from local stone and timber, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. A barn stood to the east, painted red with white trim, and several smaller outbuildings dotted the property. Corrals held horses and cattle, and she could see men working in the distance, their shouts carrying faintly on the breeze. "It is beautiful," she breathed. Vaughn looked up at her, and the expression on his face was one of such pure pride and pleasure that it made her heart skip. "Thank you. I think so too, but I know I am biased." They descended the hill and approached the main house. Before they reached the porch, the front door flew open, and a small, elegant woman with silver-streaked black hair hurried out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Vaughn Riley, you were supposed to be back 2 hours ago." I was beginning to worry that, she stopped abruptly, taking in the sight of Beatrice on the horse and Vaughn's serious expression. "What happened? Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Beatrice Harper. She's going to be helping you with the household work. Miss Harper, this is Mrs. Chen, who keeps this entire place running whether I like to admit it or not." Mrs. Chen's shrewd dark eyes assessed Beatrice quickly, missing nothing about her worn dress, pale face, or the way she swayed slightly in the saddle. "Helping me, is that what we are calling it? Vaughn, this girl looks like she is about to collapse. Get her down from there and bring her inside immediately." Vaughn reached up and lifted Beatrice from the saddle with the same easy strength he had shown earlier. This time, when her feet touched the ground, her knees buckled. He caught her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her protectively. "I am sorry," Beatrice whispered, mortified by her weakness. "Hush," Mrs. Chen said, surprisingly gentle. "You have nothing to apologize for. Vaughn, take her to the guest room. I will bring broth and bread." The next few hours passed in a blur. Vaughn carried her into the cool interior of the house and up a flight of stairs to a bedroom that was simple but comfortable. Mrs. Chen appeared with warm broth that tasted better than anything Beatrice had ever eaten, and fresh bread with butter that melted on her tongue. They made her eat slowly, small bites with pauses in between, and when she had finished what they deemed sufficient, Mrs. Chen helped her out of her threadbare dress and into a clean nightgown that must have belonged to Lily. "Rest now," Mrs. Chen commanded, pulling a light quilt over Beatrice. "Tomorrow we will talk about everything else." Beatrice wanted to argue, to insist that she needed to understand the terms of her employment and when she would begin work, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. Her eyes closed of their own accord, and she sank into sleep so deep and dreamless that it felt like falling into a feather bed made of clouds. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window in golden bars, and birds were singing in the tree outside. For a moment, she could not remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. Fainting in the general store, Vaughn Riley's gray eyes studying her with concern, the ride to the ranch. Beatrice sat up slowly, relieved to find that the dizziness had passed. Her stomach growled, but it was a normal, healthy hunger rather than the desperate emptiness that had consumed her before. Someone had laid out fresh clothes on the chair by the window. A simple cotton dress in pale green, stockings, and even undergarments. They looked barely worn, and Beatrice suspected they had also belonged to Mrs. Chen's daughter. She dressed quickly, running her fingers through her long brown hair and braiding it simply. There was a mirror above the washstand, and she grimaced at her reflection. She was too thin, her cheekbones standing out starkly in her face, but at least her eyes were clear and the grayish pallor had left her skin, stealing herself. Beatrice left the bedroom and made her way downstairs. She followed the sound of voices and the smell of coffee to a large kitchen at the back of the house. Vaughn and Mrs. Chen were sitting at a sturdy wooden table, both turning as she appeared in the doorway. "Miss Harper," Vaughn stood immediately. "You should have stayed in bed. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you, and I cannot stay in bed when I am meant to be working." She straightened her shoulders, trying to project a confidence she did not quite feel. "Mrs. Chen, please tell me what you need me to do." The older woman exchanged a glance with Vaughn, something passing between them that Beatrice could not quite interpret. "First, you will sit and eat a proper breakfast, then we will discuss work. But no arguments, Mrs. Chen pointed to a chair with the same authority she might use to command an army. "Sit." Beatrice sat. Mrs. Chen placed a plate before her laden with eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, and biscuits. A cup of coffee appeared next to it, rich and black. Beatrice stared at the abundance, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. Vaughn resumed his seat across from her, cradling his own coffee cup in his weathered hands. "Mrs. Chen, I need to ride out to check the south pasture today. Collins mentioned one of the fences might be down." "Take someone with you," Mrs. Chen said. "You know I do not like you going out alone." "Yes, madam." There was affection and gentle teasing in his tone. Beatrice ate slowly, savoring every bite. As she did, she observed the dynamic between Vaughn and his housekeeper. They moved around each other with the ease of people who had shared space for years, anticipating needs and finishing thoughts. It was clear that Vaughn valued Mrs. Chen's opinions, and she treated him with a respect that was equal parts maternal and professional. "Miss Harper," Mrs. Chen said, settling into the chair beside her, "Vaughn told me that you have been struggling to find work in Tulsa. I want you to know that this is a genuine offer of employment, not charity. I do need help, especially with the cooking and the garden. My knees are not what they used to be, and bending over to tend vegetables has become painful. Can you cook?" "I can cook basic meals," Beatrice said honestly. My mother taught me, though we never had much money for fancy ingredients. I can make stews, roast meat, bake bread, and simple pastries. I am willing to learn more. That is more than enough. What about gardening? I helped my mother with our kitchen garden when I was young. I know the basics of planting and weeding and harvesting. Mrs. Chen nodded, satisfied. Then here is what I propose. You will work 6 days a week with Sundays off. Your primary responsibilities will be helping with meals, maintaining the vegetable garden, and doing some of the lighter cleaning. The heavy work like laundry and floor scrubbing, I will still handle. In exchange, you will receive room and board plus $3 a week in wages. Beatrice's breath caught. $3 a week was more than she had made with her mending work, and room and board meant she would no longer have to worry about rent or food. It felt too good to be true. That is very generous, she said carefully. It is fair, Vaughn corrected. You will be working hard for that money, I promise you. Ranch life is not easy. I am not afraid of hard work, Mr. Riley. Vaughn, he reminded her gently. We do not stand on ceremony here. Then you must call me Beatrice. Something flickered in his eyes when she said her name, gone too quickly for her to identify. Beatrice, he repeated, and the way he said it, with a slight drawl that lingered on the vowels, made her name sound almost musical. After breakfast, Mrs. Chen took Beatrice on a tour of the house and explained the daily routines. The house was larger than it had appeared from outside, with 4 bedrooms upstairs, a parlor, dining room, and kitchen on the main floor, and a root cellar accessible through a door in the pantry. Everything was clean and well organized, though Beatrice could see signs of where that spoke to the difficulty of one woman managing it all alone. Outside, the garden was a good size but clearly struggling from neglect. Weeds grew between rows of vegetables, and some of the plants looked thirsty despite the irrigation ditch that ran along one edge. I simply have not had time, Mrs. Chen admitted, looking at the garden with frustration. By the time I finish cooking 3 meals a day and cleaning, I am too tired to do more than basic watering. I can fix this, Beatrice said with more confidence than she felt. It will take some time, but I can bring it back. Mrs. Chen smiled, really smiled for the first time. I can see that Vaughn made a good choice bringing you here. They spent the rest of the morning working together in the kitchen, with Mrs. Chen teaching Beatrice how she liked things organized. Beatrice proved to be a quick study, and soon she was chopping vegetables for the midday meal while Mrs. Chen prepared a roast. Vaughn appeared at noon with 3 ranch hands in tow, all sunburned and dusty from their morning work. Mrs. Chen introduced them. Collins, a grizzled man in his 50s who served as foreman. Pete, a lanky young man barely out of his teens with a friendly smile. And Samuel, somewhere in his 30s with a quiet demeanor and watchful eyes. Madam, they each said, tipping their hats to Beatrice as they filed past to wash up at the pump outside. The midday meal was a lively affair, with the men talking about cattle and fences and a problem with coyotes that had been harassing the herd. Beatrice mostly listened, fascinated by this glimpse into a world she had never known. Vaughn presided over the table with easy authority, but he also listened to his men's suggestions and concerns, making it clear that their opinions mattered. Several times, Beatrice found Vaughn's eyes on her, and each time their gazes met, she felt that same electric jolt she had experienced when they first touched. It confused her, this immediate and powerful awareness of him. She had never felt anything like it before. The days began to blur together in a rhythm that was both exhausting and satisfying. Beatrice rose before dawn to help Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. After they ate and headed out to their work, she and Mrs. Chen would clean the kitchen, And then Beatrice would spend several hours in the garden, pulling weeds and tending plants under the climbing sun. Around midday, she would return to help prepare lunch, and then the afternoon might be spent baking bread, preserving vegetables, mending clothes, or tackling any number of other tasks that kept a household running. She fell into bed, each night bone tired but with a sense of accomplishment she had not felt in months. Her body, which had been dangerously thin, began to fill out again with regular meals. Color returned to her cheeks. She discovered muscles she had not known she possessed, particularly after days spent bending and kneeling in the garden. But it was not just the physical work that changed her. Being part of the ranch, even in her small way, gave her a sense of belonging she had not experienced since her father's death. Mrs. Chen treated her with a firm kindness that reminded Beatrice of her mother. The ranch hands were respectful and friendly, often complimenting the meals and thanking her specifically for her contributions. And then there was Vaughn. He was unfailingly polite and proper, never overstepping boundaries, but Beatrice could not help noticing the small ways he showed his care. He made sure she had a decent hat to wear while working in the sun. When he rode into town for supplies, he always asked if she needed anything. He complimented her cooking in a way that felt genuine rather than patronizing. And sometimes, she would look up from her work to find him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. 2 weeks after her arrival, Beatrice was in the garden early one morning, trying to repair a section of fence that kept the chickens from destroying her vegetable beds. She was wrestling with a stubborn post when she heard footsteps behind her. "Need help?" Vaughn's voice was warm with amusement. She turned to find him leaning against a tree, arms crossed, looking far too handsome in the golden morning light. "I can manage. I can see that. But the question is, how long will it take you versus how long it would take if you let me help?" Beatrice laughed despite herself. "Fair point. Yes, I would appreciate help." He moved to her side and examined the post. "Ah, I see the problem. The ground here is rocky. You need to dig deeper." He knelt and began working the post free with strong, practiced movements. Beatrice crouched beside him, steadying the post as he maneuvered it. They worked in comfortable silence for several minutes, and she found herself acutely aware of his proximity, the way his shoulder brushed hers, the scent of leather and soap that clung to him. "Beatrice," he said suddenly, not looking up from his work, "are you happy here?" The question surprised her. "Yes, very much so. Why do you ask?" "I want to make sure you feel welcome, that you do not feel like you are only here out of obligation or because you had no other choice." She sat back on her heels, studying his profile. "When you found me in that store, I had no other choice. But staying, working here, that is a choice I make every day. This place, Mrs. Chen, even those ranch hands who track mud through my clean kitchen, they have all become important to me." "And me?" The question was quiet, almost hesitant. "You most of all," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, Vaughn's hands stilled on the post. He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gray eyes stole her breath. "Beatrice, I need to tell you something. From the moment I saw you fall in that store, something in me recognized something in you. I know that probably sounds ridiculous or presumptuous, but it does not sound ridiculous at all," she interrupted, "because I felt it too." The air between them seemed to shimmer with possibility. Vaughn reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and she found herself leaning into his touch. "I wanted to give you time," he said. "Time to heal, to decide if this life suited you. The last thing I wanted was for you to feel pressured or obligated because I helped you when you were vulnerable. Vaughn Riley, you are one of the most honorable men I have ever met, but I am not fragile, and I know my own mind." She covered his hand with hers, pressing it more firmly against her face. "I care for you, more than I probably should after only 2 weeks. Time is relative," he said, and then he smiled, that rare, transformative smile that made him look younger. "Out here, we learn to recognize good things when we see them and hold on tight. Waiting too long is a good way to lose what matters. Is that your philosophy on life? It is my philosophy on you." He leaned forward, slowly enough that she could have stopped him, but stopping him was the last thing Beatrice wanted. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and questioning, a kiss that asked permission even as it offered promise. She answered by sliding her hand to the back of his neck, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. When they finally broke apart, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "I am courting you, Beatrice Harper, officially and properly. I want you to know my intentions are serious. I accept your courtship, Vaughn Riley. My intentions are equally serious." They stayed there in the garden as the sun climbed higher, sometimes talking, sometimes simply existing in each other's presence. Eventually, they finished repairing the fence, though it took much longer than it should have because they kept getting distracted by stolen kisses and quiet laughter. Mrs. Chen, watching from the kitchen window, smiled to herself and began preparing extra dumplings for dinner. She had suspected this outcome from the moment Vaughn had carried Beatrice into the house, and she was deeply pleased to see her intuition proven correct. The courtship that followed was perhaps unconventional by the standards of polite society, but it suited them perfectly. They did not have the luxury of formal parlor visits or chaperoned outings. Instead, they courted each other in the midst of work and daily life. Vaughn would help Beatrice carry water for the garden and stay to talk while she weeded. She would pack special treats in his saddlebags when he rode out for long days checking cattle. They took walks together in the evenings, exploring the land surrounding the ranch while the sky turned shades of orange and purple. He told her about his childhood in Kansas, about a father who had been stern but fair, a mother who had died when he was 12, and a younger sister who had married a shopkeeper in Wichita. She shared memories of her parents, the happy years before her mother's illness, her father's slow decline after her mother's death, and the terrifying loneliness of finding herself truly alone in the world. "You are not alone anymore," Vaughn said one evening as they sat together on the porch steps, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. "You will never be alone again if I have anything to say about it." "That sounds like a promise, Mr. Riley." "It is, Miss Harper. It absolutely is." A month into their courtship, Vaughn took Beatrice into Tulsa on a Saturday afternoon. It was her first time back in town since the day she had collapsed, and she felt strange walking down the familiar streets as a different person. She was healthier now, stronger, and she wore a new dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew from fabric Vaughn had insisted on buying. They visited the general store first, where Morrison greeted them with a jovial friendliness that made Beatrice want to roll her eyes. The man had not cared when she was starving, but now that she was under Vaughn Riley's protection, he could not be more accommodating. "Miss Harper, you look wonderful, just wonderful. Ranch life clearly agrees with you," Morrison gushed. "Thank you," she said coolly, staying close to Vaughn's side as he ordered supplies. As they were leaving, a woman's voice called out, "Beatrice! Beatrice Harper, is that you?" Beatrice turned to see Amanda Peterson, the seamstress who had employed her briefly, hurrying across the street. The older woman looked shocked and a little guilty. "Mrs. Peterson," Beatrice said politely, "my goodness, you look so different. I heard you were working at the Riley Ranch. I am so glad you found a position. I felt just terrible about having to let you go, but my sister, you understand, I understand perfectly, Beatrice interrupted, not unkindly. Everything worked out as it was meant to. She felt Vaughn's hand settle on the small of her back, a gesture of support and possession that was not lost on Mrs. Peterson. The seamstress's eyes widened slightly. "Well, I am very happy for you, very happy indeed. You must come by for tea sometime." "Perhaps," Beatrice said noncommittally. After they finished their errands, Vaughn suggested they have lunch at the hotel restaurant, a luxury that made Beatrice hesitate until he reminded her that she had been working without a single day off and deserved to be treated. The restaurant was the finest establishment in Tulsa, with white tablecloths and a menu that made Beatrice's eyes widen. Vaughn ordered for them both, and they spent a leisurely hour eating steak and potatoes while he told her funny stories about mishaps on the ranch. "Last spring, we had a cow that kept escaping her pen. No matter what we did, she found a way out. Pete was convinced she was magic. Turned out she had learned to work the latch with her nose. Once we figured it out, we got a better lock, but we still call her Houdini." Beatrice laughed, imagining the scene. "Is Pete always so superstitious?" "He has his moments. Good kid, though, works hard and does not complain." After lunch, they walked through the town square where a small band was playing music and families were enjoying the sunny afternoon. Vaughn bought Beatrice a peppermint stick from a vendor, and she savored the sweet treat as they strolled. "Beatrice," Vaughn said as they approached the wagon for the ride home, "I want to ask you something, but I do not want you to feel pressured to answer right away." Her heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" "In 3 months, there is a Cattlemen's Association ball in Oklahoma City. It is the social event of the year for ranchers and their families. I would like you to come with me as my intended." "Your intended?" she repeated, her voice coming out breathless. "Yes." He took both of her hands in his, right there in the middle of Tulsa's Main Street, apparently unconcerned about who might see. "I know it has only been a month, and perhaps this is too fast by conventional standards, but I love you, Beatrice Harper. I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. And I want to introduce you to everyone who matters in this territory as the woman I plan to spend my life with." Tears sprang to Beatrice's eyes, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Vaughn Riley, I love you too. Yes, I will go to the ball as your intended. Yes, I will marry you. Yes to everything." He swept her into his arms right there on the street and kissed her soundly, earning them whistles and applause from passers-by. When he set her back on her feet, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. The ride back to the ranch was full of plans and dreams. They decided to marry in early fall, after the harvest, but before the winter weather became unpredictable. It would be a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Mrs. Chen and the ranch hands and perhaps a few friends from town. Beatrice did not have family to invite, and Vaughn said his sister probably would not make the journey, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the commitment they were making to each other. When they arrived home, Mrs. Chen took one look at their faces and knew immediately what had happened. She hugged Beatrice fiercely, whispering in her ear, "I told you that boy made good choices." That evening, Vaughn gathered the ranch hands and formally announced the engagement. Collins clapped him on the back and told Beatrice she was getting a good man. Pete grinned and said he had known from the start that something was brewing. Samuel, in his quiet way, simply shook their hands and wished them happiness. The next 3 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. In addition to her regular duties, Beatrice began preparing for the wedding and for her new role as mistress of the house. Mrs. Chen taught her the more advanced aspects of household management, from budgeting and accounts to the delicate art of dealing with suppliers and hired help. Beatrice also spent hours working on her wedding dress, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored silk that Vaughn had purchased on another trip to town. Mrs. Chen helped with the intricate beadwork on the bodice, and together they created something beautiful. The garden flourished under Beatrice's devoted care, producing a bounty of vegetables that kept them well fed and even allowed them to sell some surplus in town. Vaughn often told her that she had a magic touch with growing things, and she would laugh and say it was just patience and attention. But there were challenges too. One night in late August, a terrible storm rolled across the prairie, bringing hail and fierce winds that damaged part of the barn roof and scattered cattle across the range. Vaughn and the ranch hands worked for 3 days straight to round up the herd and repair the damage. Beatrice and Mrs. Chen kept food and coffee coming at all hours, and Beatrice learned what it truly meant to be a rancher's wife, to support and endure through the difficult times. When Vaughn finally stumbled into the house on the 3rd night, exhausted and filthy, Beatrice was waiting with hot water for a bath and a plate of food. She helped him wash his hair, her fingers gentle on his scalp, and he leaned back against the copper tub with his eyes closed. "I could not have done this without you," he murmured. "Knowing you were here, that I had something good to come home to, it kept me going." "We are a partnership now," she said softly. "Your challenges are my challenges. Your victories are my victories. I do not deserve you. You saved my life, Vaughn. You fed me when I was starving, gave me purpose when I had none, and loved me when I thought I would never be loved again. If anything, I do not deserve you." He opened his eyes and looked up at her with such tenderness that her breath caught. "I guess we will just have to agree that we are both incredibly lucky. I can accept that." The Cattlemen's Association ball arrived faster than Beatrice expected. They traveled to Oklahoma City by train, a journey that took most of a day but was comfortable and even exciting. Beatrice had never ridden on a train before, and she spent much of the trip with her face pressed to the window, watching the landscape roll by. Oklahoma City was larger and more sophisticated than Tulsa, with paved streets in the center of town and buildings that rose 3 and even 4 stories high. The ball was held at the finest hotel, a grand establishment with crystal chandeliers and marble floors that reflected the light like water. Beatrice felt nervous as they entered the ballroom, acutely aware that she was a nobody among people of wealth and influence. But Vaughn kept her hand tucked securely in the crook of his arm, and his quiet confidence bolstered her own courage. He introduced her to dozens of people, ranchers and their wives, businessmen and bankers, even the territorial governor. Each time he presented her the same way. "This is Beatrice Harper, my fiancée." The word fiancée, spoken in his proud voice, never failed to send a thrill through her. They danced together as a small orchestra played, and Beatrice discovered that Vaughn was surprisingly graceful despite his rough and tumble rancher exterior. He waltzed her around the floor with skill, his hand warm and steady on her waist. "You are full of surprises, Mr. Riley," she said. "Where did a Kansas farm boy learn to dance like this?" "My mother insisted that her children be civilized," he said with a grin. "She made my father build a dance floor in our barn and invited families from all over the county for lessons. I hated it at the time, but I am grateful now." "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was. I wish she could have met you. She would have loved you." Later in the evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the city lights, Vaughn pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I was going to wait until the wedding, but this moment feels right." He opened the box to reveal a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my grandmother's. My mother left it to me with instructions to give it to the woman who captured my heart. I cannot imagine it on anyone's hand but yours." Beatrice's hand trembled as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. "It is beautiful, Vaughn. I will treasure it always. Not as much as I treasure you." They married on a perfect September afternoon when the heat of summer had finally broken, and the air held a hint of autumn's coming cool. The ceremony took place in the ranch's front yard, under a canopy of cottonwood trees that had turned gold at the edges. A minister from Tulsa performed the service, with Mrs. Chen standing as Beatrice's witness and Collins as Vaughn's. Beatrice wore her cream silk dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Pete had gathered from the prairie that morning. Vaughn wore a new black suit that made his gray eyes look like silver, and when he saw her walking toward him, the expression on his face was one of such pure love and joy that Beatrice felt tears spill down her cheeks. The vows were traditional and simple, but when Vaughn said, "I do," his voice was fierce with conviction, and when Beatrice repeated the words, she meant them with every fiber of her being. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister said with a smile. "You may kiss your bride." Vaughn pulled Beatrice into his arms and kissed her deeply, to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Mrs. Chen was crying openly, and even Collins looked suspiciously misty-eyed. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself with a feast that included roasted beef, fresh vegetables from the garden, homemade bread, and a beautiful cake that she had decorated with spun sugar flowers. There was music and dancing as the sun set in brilliant streaks of orange and red across the prairie sky. As night fell and the party wound down, Vaughn led Beatrice into the house and up the stairs to what was now their bedroom. He had spent the previous week making improvements, adding new curtains and a beautiful quilt that Mrs. Chen had made as a wedding gift. "Are you happy?" he asked, his arms around her waist as they stood by the window looking out at the land bathed in moonlight. "I am more than happy. I am complete in a way I never thought possible." She turned in his arms to face him. "When I fainted in that store, I thought my life was over. I was so hungry, so scared, so utterly alone. And then you appeared like something out of a dream and you gave me everything. Food, shelter, work, purpose, and most of all, love. You gave me just as much," Vaughn said seriously. "Before you, this ranch was just a place, a business. You turned it into a home. You brought warmth and laughter and light into every corner. You made me want to be better, to build something that would last. We will build it together," Beatrice promised, "for the rest of our lives." That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both awed by the depth of their connection. They fit together perfectly, two broken pieces that had found their missing halves. The years that followed were not without challenges. The ranch demanded constant work and vigilance. There were droughts that killed grass and made cattle thin. There were harsh winters that brought blizzards and losses. There were market fluctuations that affected prices and threatened their financial security. But through it all, Vaughn and Beatrice faced every challenge as a united front. When times were hard, they found comfort in each other. When times were good, they celebrated together. The love that had begun with a simple act of kindness in a general store only deepened and matured with each passing season. In the spring of 1884, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. The news was met with jubilation from everyone on the ranch. Mrs. Chen immediately began knitting tiny garments, and Vaughn became almost comically protective, insisting that Beatrice rest more and do less heavy work. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she would protest with exasperated affection. "I know, but I cannot help worrying. You are carrying the most precious thing in the world to me." Their first child, a son they named Vincent Robert Riley, was born in late November during the first snowfall of the season. Vaughn held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, marveling at the tiny, perfect human they had created together. "He has your eyes," Beatrice said, exhausted but radiant. "And your stubborn chin," Vaughn replied, which earned him a weak laugh. Vincent was followed by a daughter, Margaret Ann, 2 years later, and then another son, Thomas Vaughn, 3 years after that. The house that had once seemed so spacious became filled with the chaos and joy of children, their laughter echoing through rooms and their toys scattered across floors. Beatrice proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving but firm when necessary. Vaughn was the kind of father who got down on the floor to play with his children, who taught them to ride almost before they could walk, who read them stories every night before bed, no matter how tired he was from ranch work. Mrs. Chen became Grandmother Chen to the children, doting on them with sweets and stories about her life in China before she came to America. She lived to see all 3 grandchildren born and remained a vital part of the household until she passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1891. Surrounded by the family she had helped create, her loss was deeply felt, but the traditions she had established continued. Beatrice taught her daughter the recipes Mrs. Chen had taught her, and together they tended the garden that had once been Beatrice's salvation. The ranch prospered over the years. Vaughn proved to have a genius for cattle breeding, and the Riley Ranch became known throughout Oklahoma Territory for producing some of the finest stock in the region. They expanded their holdings, purchased more land, and hired more hands. By the mid-1890s, the Riley Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the territory. But success never changed the core of who they were. Vaughn remained approachable and fair with his workers, and Beatrice made sure that any ranch hand who worked for them never went hungry, remembering all too well what that desperation felt like. They became known for their generosity, often helping neighbors in times of trouble and supporting the growth of Tulsa as it transformed from a rough frontier town into a proper city. When Oklahoma became a state in 1907, Vaughn and Beatrice attended the celebrations in Oklahoma City with their children, now young adults starting to make their own ways in the world. As they watched the flag being raised, Beatrice squeezed her husband's hand. "You remember the day we met?" she asked. "Every detail," Vaughn replied. "I remember walking into Morrison's store and seeing you fall. I remember thinking that I had never seen anyone look so fragile and so strong at the same time. I remember deciding in that instant that I was going to help you, no matter what it took. You saved my life that day." "No." He turned to look at her, and even after 25 years of marriage, the intensity in his gray eyes could still make her heart skip. "We saved each other. I was living half a life before you, going through the motions but never really feeling anything. You woke me up, Beatrice. You taught me what it meant to truly love someone, to build a life that matters." Vincent approached with his wife, Sarah, and their toddler daughter balanced on his hip. "Mother, father, they are about to begin the speeches. You should find seats." As they settled into place among the crowds celebrating statehood, Beatrice looked around at the life she had built. Her children were healthy and happy, pursuing their own dreams with the security and support she had never had at their age. Her husband was still her best friend and greatest love. The ranch that had once been just a refuge had become a legacy. She thought about the girl who had fainted from hunger in a general store all those years ago, so desperate and afraid. That girl could never have imagined this future, this abundance of love and security and purpose. "What are you thinking about?" Vaughn whispered. "How grateful I am," she whispered back. "For everything, but especially for you. For a cowboy who saw a stranger in need and decided to help, who fed me and made sure I never starved again, who gave me not just food but a reason to live. Best decision I ever made, Vaughn said simply. Mine too, Beatrice agreed, resting her head on his shoulder as the speeches began and Oklahoma officially became a state. The years continued to pass. Vincent took over more and more of the ranch operations as Vaughn gradually stepped back, though he never fully retired. He could not stay away from the cattle and the land he had worked so hard to build. Margaret married a lawyer from Tulsa and gave them 2 more grandchildren. Thomas became a veterinarian, one of the first in the newly formed state, and set up practice in Oklahoma City, but visited the ranch often. Beatrice and Vaughn grew old together gracefully, their hair turning silver, their faces acquiring the lines and character that come from years of laughter and hard work. They still took walks together in the evenings when weather permitted, still held hands across the dinner table, still looked at each other with the love that had never dimmed. On a warm evening in the spring of 1912, 30 years after they had first met, Beatrice and Vaughn sat together on the porch swing, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. The garden was in full bloom, a riot of colors and scents that Beatrice had cultivated over decades of patient care. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if we had never met?" Beatrice asked, a question she had pondered many times over the years. "Sometimes," Vaughn admitted. "I think I would have been successful, would have built the ranch and made money. But I would have been hollow inside. The ranch would have been just a business, not a home. I would never have known what it meant to be truly happy." "I would have died," Beatrice said matter-of-factly. "If you had not been in that store that day, I would have fainted and eventually died from starvation and neglect. I had reached the end of my rope. You were my miracle. Then I am grateful beyond words that I decided to go into town that day, that I arrived at that exact moment, that I saw you fall and felt compelled to help." He pulled her closer, and she nestled against his side in the way they had done thousands of times over their years together. "Every moment since then has been a gift." "Every single one," Beatrice agreed. The grandchildren's laughter rang out across the yard, chasing fireflies as the sun began to set. Inside the house, now expanded and updated but still fundamentally the same home they had built together, Sarah was helping prepare dinner. Vincent could be heard talking with one of the ranch hands about plans for the following day. Life continued, generation flowing into generation, all of it rooted in the moment a hungry woman fainted in a general store and a compassionate cowboy decided to help. That single act of kindness had grown into something magnificent. A family, a legacy, a love story that would be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come. As darkness fell, and the stars began to emerge in the vast Oklahoma sky, Vaughn and Beatrice remained on the porch swing, content in each other's presence, grateful for every day they had been given together. The cowboy had fed her and made sure she never starved again, not just for food but for love, for security, for purpose. And in return, she had given him a life filled with meaning and joy, proving that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simplest acts of human kindness. Their story was not one of grand adventures or dramatic gestures, but of 2 people who found each other at exactly the right moment and chose every day thereafter to build something beautiful together. And in the end, that was the greatest love story of all.